Don't know how that got going. She's off. She's off.
That was as good as it gets in yachting. I wouldn't swap a gold medal or an America's Cup or a Vendée trophy for that moment. That was my dream.
This week's Royal Ocean Racing Club Time Over Distance guest is Rocket Man Paul Larsen, the fastest sailor on the planet, having clocked 68 knots in Vestas Sailrocket. Larson has always been involved in cutting-edge projects, but in this interview, he looks from the outside in to the foiling technology in the Vendée Globe and the 46th America's Cup. Thank you very much for joining us for the RORC Time Over Distance series. Paul, would you please tell the viewers, where did you grow up?
I grew up in rural Victoria, about 50 kilometres, 60 kilometres northeast of Melbourne. So out in the Australian bush, right at the foot of the Great Dividing Range, that string of mountains that comes down the east coast of Australia. And I guess the town had, I don't know, about 4,500 people in it. Football, cricket, doing donuts in cars, swimming in rivers and creeks and dams. It was a pretty nice, simple, basic lifestyle, but certainly no sailing boats around. It took a while for me to get round to sailing. I mean, we lived up on top of a hill, and you had tank water, and we were the only house that lived up this road. And sometimes Dad was a postie by the day, and Mum was a nurse by night. And I often remember that in the middle of the night, Dad would have to go down because Mum couldn't make it up the hill to the house, and have to back this car down this treacherous hill and drive it up. And so, I mean, we had dams that we swam in. And a lot of the people around there, a lot of my friends, they also lived out in farms and out in the sticks and stuff. So, but yeah, sailing just wasn't a thing. Sailing, surfing, none of that. It was football, tennis, cricket. It was all the usual sports. One day Dad was building a house up there, and he just came and got a sharpened bit of square wood, just put a V in the nose of it and put a margarine lid on the top, and it blew across the dam in a direction, and you had nothing else going on. So you just started making different shaped bits of wood and bigger lids and deeper things, and bit by bit, you just ended up. I mean, I dug up one of these photos probably, 12 years ago, and I'm just stunned at the intricacy of how those models turned into slotted wings with upper flaps and self-steering gear on the back of it. That boat, it's got deck spreaders. I mean, I didn't have remote control systems and stuff. It was made out of cedar with a balsa deck, and I thought that was sort of. Yeah. It even had a canted keel on it, And I'd never sat on a boat in my life. So, and you're building these things. So it was kind of interesting. We went up and started sailing on the lakes, and that's when I started really not doing cricket and football and all that, and going hanging out with Dad and sailing. And we got invited down to Port Phillip Bay by someone who came by our lake and said you should try racing.
And I reckon you were 13 when a Melburnian like yourself, John Bertrand, with Australia 2. Yeah. What was that like at 13 years of age?
It was, you look back and you read books on the history, and when certain landmark things happened in, say, computing, when it just happened to be that the right people got their hands on the right computer in the right library at the right time, and it started to change. I mean, and I went down there, and all of a sudden I was into sailing, and none of your friends were into sailing, as I said, because you came from this rural town. But then, boom, sailing was big news. I mean, it was the biggest news. It was bigger than cricket and tennis and football and everything. We had a crack at this America's Cup, and half the country was staying up at 2, 3 in the morning watching these, painfully long races. Dad was always, and you're at that combative age with your father as well, and he's saying, Australia, the Americans always win. Australia, they're going down, and you're sitting there starting to get this young bull, old bull sort of thing, and you're sailing with your dad on the boat, and you're getting competitive, and we're down 3-1, and And then we came back, and I just watched with all the hope in the world, that they do it. And that was a big thing. So all of a sudden, me going down to Port Phillip Bay was a cool thing to do. Yeah. Sailing was booming in the 80s. The Hobie Cat scene was booming. And, the seed was well and truly planted. But there was still no real obvious path in Australia to get from you sailing a Hobie Cat into that America's Cup. You never saw a professional career in sailing. It was something you did for fun as a kid, and I was very fortunate to meet some very capable, very talented, hungry young sailors who showed you how to race, and pushed me really, really hard. And I was a little, trophy hunting animal, so I was all up for it. I just lived and breathed it, and the first time we saw that Victoria 150 on the race course and it went past us, that's like a First World War pilot seeing an F-18 or something go past. That was just, they're trapezing downwind. I mean, they're flying, they're doing 2 laps to our 1. It's just the angles and everything, and it just blew me away. So all this was just imprinting me that, to design, develop, to see this innovation. Australia too, with the wing keel, and whether that's what did it or not, is certainly debatable. But the fact that innovation exists, everything was about innovation and can-do and pluck. And I was just a sponge soaking it all up. So.
1998, you were part of Bruno Peyron's crew on Explorer for the Transpac world record, and this is just a few years after the boat had gone round the world in under 80 days. What was it like? What was it like doing 5,000 miles with a crew like that as a 20-something-year-old Aussie? Gosh, that must have been incredible.
Well, I thought I'd blown my life. I didn't finish university. I wandered around itinerant fruit picking, driving up and down the coast, sleeping in the back of cars, and I really thought there's a chance life's going to pass me by here unless I do something serious. So I kept moving till I found my tribe, and my tribe was up in Airlie Beach, and they were, there was a sailing community up there, and I got into that, and eventually got into back into sailing, but still. I guess the things that got my foot in the door was I used to sail Hobie Cat, so you could work on the front beach and teach, Japanese tourists how to sail boats, and then you ended up on sunsail boats, and I just was fascinated by navigating at night, like the reading the charts, just the possibilities that once you start to get on these bigger boats of what you could do, and you became, super familiar with diesel engines and furling systems and all these different things. And we lived and breathed boats. And then one day Bruno turned up with that boat around the corner, and came around the corner and saw this 86-foot beach cat. And it was, to me, it was like seeing an alien ship. It was just, I just couldn't imagine how cool everything about that boat would be. And, so just did whatever I could. And then just by random interaction, just going to a sunsail barbecue one night, a team barbecue, and seeing someone at the table and not knowing who it is, and just going, who's that guy over there? And, oh, that's the guy who's looking after that catamaran down at Lindeman Island. Just boom, beeline, straight next to that guy. And it's like, I will literally, eBay hasn't been invented yet, but when it is, I'll put my grandmother straight on it to get on that boat. And that was, and one day after hassling him enough, he said, okay, the boat's leaving, and bring a pair of sunglasses, and that's it. You won't get paid, but we'll give you a flight back. And 4 of us took that boat. Skip Novak was the skipper. And 4 of us took that boat from Lindeman Island. It had 2 little outboards that didn't work, and just bottles of water. It was pretty basic, and a jet boil, and I'd never been out of sight of land in my life,
Wow.
and we took that thing up through the reef, and Skip would keep sticking his head up, going, remember, 20 knots, that's the limit, 20 knots. And because every time you bared away a fraction, it would like, whoop, off it would go. And we'd be sitting there like never having gone so fast, and he'd keep sticking his head up. But so we sailed at 4,500 miles to Japan. So it's those little casual interactions, and I say that to anyone who's young in this sport. You never know who you're talking to or how they're going to affect your life, and it's those little things that will make all the difference. And it's and I'll just say, I look at that photo and I read so much in that photo.
Yeah. 2000 Team Philips, 120-foot catamaran, skippered by Pete Goss for the race. That was what it was built for. 120 foot long, 70 feet wide, 135 foot rig. In new money, that's a 41 meter rig on a 37 meter catamaran in 2000. It must have been the biggest structure anybody had built by 2000.
It was the biggest composite structure going. There wasn't any multi-hulls on the water at that stage. There was everyone was building them or talking about building them, but there wasn't any competition from your America's Cup sailors or your Volvo sailors or anything like that. There was only a scarce few people who had any experience on the big boats. So the fact that you just done this record with Bruno was something to hang your hat on, and it got your foot in the door. And Pete's boat always looked wacky. It always looked wacky, even still now. Probably why I got it on the wall behind me here. But it definitely wasn't my first choice because Explorer was such an amazing boat to sail, as were the Club Med generation boats were amazing boats to sail. But as soon as I went over there and saw what they were doing, and I met Pete and Andy Hinley, and I guess the Brits got my sense of humour, whereas the French not so much. So that sort of helped, and I went to get the opportunity to go over there, which is a story in itself. It was mind-blowing. It was incredibly innovative. It was just fascinating to see the way the thing was built. And my job in the boat was to help build the crew pod. So I got down there and got my hands dirty on the composites and was very intimate with everything that was happening down there on the shop floor, which was fascinating. And certainly put me in good stead later on when it came to building my own boats. So, it's a real shame how it ended up. Real shame how it ended up, but I understand how it ended up. If I could swap everyone for one person that I met on my travels, it would probably be Pete. He was very lucky, and he was a fantastic mentor through the early days of the Sailrocket, and the way he conducted himself, through the trauma of having that project fall apart. How he could have said things, but he took it on himself rather than throw people under the bus. Who probably deserves throwing under the bus, was pretty, was a mark of the man. And I've certainly, he would teach you things without having to say things, like he wouldn't have to, you just watch what he does and how he conducted himself and think, all right, that's, one day I hope I can behave like that. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and being on that boat when we lost it in the North Atlantic, and the whole thing was a gutting experience. I couldn't believe that we were going to get off it. We'd put so much work, there was so much passion, there was so much at stake with that boat. To put out that Mayday and realise that means we're getting off this one and only boat that's coming past. I just didn't think that was. This boat, this was going to be my life after the race and everything. This was everything. I'd been living on the boat for the past 6 months, and but looking back, he was making exactly the right calls and exactly how he gave he pushed hard. A few things happened out of our hands, a few things that are questionable whether we should have been in that situation or we had a little bit of summer fever to get to the start or not. But when it went south, straight away he put the people ahead of the project, and there was no doubt in his mind that where the line was, and it's very admirable. So It was quite emotional getting off that boat.
So, yeah, we got it right.
Say that again.
Brilliant. All those bloody sums and all that stuff, you know, it does actually mean something in the end, but you've got to do a lot of work to make it mean something.
But the origins of it all goes back to those little models playing up on that dam. I mean, I was always fascinated, not having anyone show you how a boat works or why the keel's there and the sail's there and not there and why the rudder's there and what happens if you put a big jib. And you just sat there with no remote control units, and you quickly learn if you put the keel back there, the boat constantly turns away. So you learn all these balance points and these weights and levers. There was one book I read when I was up in Airlie Beach that I had one of the most boring jobs I've ever had working this yacht chandlery. And but the owner of the shop, a guy called Terry, had this book. He said, borrow any of my books if you like. And he had this old book called The 40-Knot Sailboat. And I kind of laughed, thinking, oh, God, it's 1960s that's written. I wonder what they thought a fast boat looked like back then. And I read this book, and it painted out this very simple, elegant concept of, instead of having the forces offset and correcting them with weights and levers, people on trapeze, wings like 18-foot skiffs, big proas like Yellow Pages Endeavour or Cats or Trimarans, there was this elegant solution of where these forces are aligned. And it was just like this eureka moment where it was like, God, that is so simple. That just solves everything else I'm trying to do, is this dynamically unstable solution, and this thing just resolves it. So that means instead of bearing away and getting overpowered in the death zone, this thing can just, like a watermelon pit, no matter how hard you squeeze it, it can only go in one direction. And you hang out with these amazing projects and people, I guess there comes a time when you think, why doesn't someone do it? And you just realize you're that someone, and it's this time now. And when I came back to England, I went and saw Malcolm, and met Malcolm, and knew that I'd met the guy I needed with the perfect attitude, just a very pure scientific mind with very little ego. How fast you could go across that little stretch of water, that was fascinating.
But seriously, Paul, you know, doing that sort of speed in, let's be honest, a very radical machine, did your life flash before your eyes getting into Sailrocket? I mean, it's very dangerous what you did.
Throughout the build and everything. My desk was a few meters away from every bit of carbon that went down on that boat, and it just had to be right. This was not going to be one of those wacky things that fail. So, yeah, bloody scary. But if that fear wasn't in the room, you weren't about to do something special.
That video, I mean, there's some biblical references. There's some swearing going on and all the rest of it. But I want to ask you what was going through your mind. You can see there's a point in the video. You got the boat all set up. You're going like the clappers, and then you can see that front ski on the boat just harden up and just say, right, we're going high here, guys. And wow, off you go. That moment when that sudden acceleration, what's going through your head when you go from that 35 to 55, 60 knots?
The boat's doing about just under 2.5 times wind speed. It doesn't sound that impressive in this day and age compared to, the multiples of wind speed you're seeing with the AC boats. But when you start using those foils, it's like trying to glide with a jet fighter. They're not that efficient wings, but they do go supersonic. So to get 2.5 times wind speed out of those foils was something else. You've got to remember that about 8 days before, we hadn't got that boat faster than the first boat. We were still down at this glass ceiling of 52 knots. So I hadn't done multiple runs building up to that. Every run, this boat was being tweaked and modified as this whole new speed regime was opening up to us. And we only sailed it for I think it was 4 days when it was in fast mode. And every time we went out there, it was just obliterating, record. Even now, I still look at that. That was quite unique. It was I think the foil went from being side ventilated, where it was basically you can do it on a laser if you don't let out the main sheet around the top mark, and your rudder, but you just store your rudders. And when it lined up down the course, I think it reattached flow on the side, and so you went from a high leeway angle to hooking in. You were worried that, God, what happens if this folds up? I knew if that boat folded up at that speed, we didn't have time to do the safety. It was something you thought you would have done afterwards. The boat's going down the course at 20 degrees, so you're going down it sideways. If that nosedives, it's not even a forward nosedive. It's like it's one thing to crash and have your airbags come off out of the steering wheel, but if you go into a sliding crash and hit a tree side on, it's a different thing. And I always knew in that boat, my head's sticking out, I'm strapped in, it's going to be a broken neck. It's because when you're doing 2.5 times wind speed, the wind is never pegged at 27 knots. It's going up and down a few knots either side, and that can mean a 10-knot difference in speed. So it only takes 14 and a half seconds to do a 500-meter course at 65 knots. And quite often you feel that acceleration, then you feel it sag off, and then it accelerates again because you're bisecting these gusts down this beach. You're going across them at 90 degrees true wind angle. And so when I hit that massive number at the top of that course, it was over 68 knots. I'm expecting it to go through it and then maybe sag off on the other side, but it just stayed up there. And that's when, so what that swearing is actually me doing the accounting for the average for the run, where I'm going, that's fast, that's real fast, that's really I'm banking a big number here. That was as good as it gets in yachting, and I wouldn't swap a gold medal or an America's Cup or a Vendée trophy for that moment. That was my dream. So that was it. Perfect.
Yeah. There's a lot of F's in 55, isn't there?
Yeah.
So, Paul, moving on, Vendée Globe in Mocha. We had 33 IMOCAs in the Vendée Globe 2020, biggest fleet the race has ever seen. And we're going to have a little chat about your takeaways from the Vendée Globe. And we should point out that there were still boats racing. I mean, it's that soon after the race. And you've picked out one particular boat. We'll look at some others as well, but particularly L'Occitane.
It's a very striking boat. All the videos they show of it looks like, I just love the way it skims over the water. I love the way that bow passes through the water. It's sort of got this tendency when it comes down off the foil, instead of having this knife that sort of plows through the water, it seems to pick up and just skim like a dish over the top. I like how the how the foils ride through the water. I like the philosophy behind it, that they say it's a lot more comfortable on board. It doesn't slam so much. The engine's right at the back. Apparently, it's got a the engine's right at the very back of the boat, and the cockpit there, if you look at it, is anyone who stands in a rib when it starts slamming, the best place to stand is right at the back near the outboard. It's the further you go up the front, the more it slams. So if you're going to spend all your time sitting on enduring that boat doing that, then I think having everything at the back there is a smart way to go. The clean decks, the simple build of it. They mentioned that it was a cheaper and easier boat to build, and actually a relatively simple boat in that respect. And Sam Manward and his history with boats, I just liked it. Well, from the rumour is that Jeremy Bayou's ordered one. These boats they're an incomplete foiling solution. They don't have a T-foil, so basically when the front foils, the main foils lift the boat up, they're not lifted up out of the water as the tail of the boat lifts up also. All they can do is drag their backside, their planing surface along. And as they go faster, quite often the nose just rides higher until it either crashes down or through waves or whatever. It's not a nice dynamic thing. Nice flat conditions at certain angles. When you're in control of the video edit, they look fantastic. The reality is that they're not that nice, and they're actually quite on and off. And actually how they go down in the messy conditions of the Southern Ocean, anyone who goes down there thinking they're going to get lovely big rolling sea states with all the waves in one direction is usually cruelly let down. It's quite often a real dog's dinner down there, and trying to push these boats that are trying to sail very fast whilst you're driving down these pitch black abysses one after the other is a very, very hard thing to design for. How all the different boats have handled this particular edition of the Vendée Globe has been fascinating. I think that boat gave a very good account of itself whenever it could on equal terms. I just like the look of it. I like the fact that how high the foils exit out of the boat. I think he can retract a lot of that foil. Whereas if you look at the other pictures of the boats like the Corums and the other boats, they've only in those sloppy sea states running deep downwind in the middle of the night. I would imagine there's quite often a lot of foil in the water that's kind of working, not working. I imagine it's quite a messy affair. And I think in those conditions that actually having a more conventional boat that's actually got a really nice hull shape that isn't totally reliant on the foils to give it its stability is a nice way to go. And I think that's been proven by how well the non-foilers went this time. That said, there was only a couple of gates there where it's quite possible that these foiling boats in a slightly different weather scenario could have made an escape that would have been very hard to chase down. But the fact that all those boats were so close, it makes it hard going forward to know what you'd really go for next time. Whenever those boats got a chance to stretch their legs, if we remember back at the Southeast Trades after the equator when they ducked down, and I think it was linked out, and a Pivier taking miles just one at a time out of the Hugo Boss, but those three boats just really started to stretch out. So if you had got onto a freeway down there where those weather systems were a little bit further north, and you could have really got onto the on-ramp there, I think you would have seen those boats stretch out quite hard.
How relevant do you think it is that Matricop that won, Bestaven that won the Vendée Globe was considered to be a slightly more conservative foiler? Do you think that's a fair thing to say? Contributed to the win?
Absolutely. I mean, it was still a nice boat without the foils. So you can see in one of the photos you got there where the boat's heeled over and the windward foils actually retracted. You can get a lot of that foil out of the way. and still lean on a nice hull there. And once again, the Vendée, I mean, it is very unusual to have a race. I mean, did anyone think, Yannick or Charlie Darlin was a winner or a loser above the other? I mean, it's just they both incredible stories. Louis Burton and these guys. I mean, it is a race where there's so many winners in that who give incredible accounts and return to the sponsors and spectators. It's a stunning race.
Paul, off camera, you said to me you reckon there's a lot of the latest generation boats on the market. Well, why do you think that is?
If you started to think it's all or nothing and you get people leading this charge, like Alex and stuff, everyone knows he's in it to win it. He stakes his colours to the mast on that one. And it's so if that's the standard, and it's kind of one of the problems with foilers. Like if you're going for a transatlantic record, there's a lot of chance that foilers are going to be less reliable than other boats for a variety of reasons, but only one of them has to get through, and it's going to set a benchmark that's you're going to have a foiler to beat it. That's all there is to it. So if these guys start stacking all their chips in the foiling basket and they start really optimizing a boat for foiling, then you start making narrower hulls, and so you don't have a very nice hull shape there, and you're basically relying on the foils a lot more to give you your stability. What that's like down in those messy sea states and all those crazy conditions, all those sloppy conditions where there's not so much wind, what assumptions you make for the percentage of the race that actually occurs for is what you live or die by. So if those guys have chosen to make a boat that's a little bit narrow and leaning on the foils too much, and then maybe they're looking at that now and saying that wasn't that whole thing we talked about before the race and we thought we were going to live. I rarely saw that, so I would actually err a little bit more in this direction, or maybe the boat we have is right, but there's just a few key parts of it that are wrong. It is the Everest of sailing. And like that mountain, just climbing it's an achievement, and who won it is a bonus. But it's proven itself to be an incredibly viable event from top to bottom.
Now we're going to change to a slightly different subject: the America's Cup. Not quite the same as the Vendée Globe, but we're going to talk foiling here as well.
Well, at the end of the day, boats only go as fast as, it's lift versus drag or thrust versus drag. So on these boats, they've got no dynamic way of creating more righting moment. So once they've got that foil down and the foil up to windward, and people aren't hiking out on the side or trapezing or anything, those days are gone. They can a little bit of downforce from the rudder, of course, but they've reached their righting moment limit. So the thing is, they can go whatever multiple of boat speed to wind speed we're seeing there, probably about 3.5 to 1. Every time you lose a little bit of drag on these boats, you're going a little bit faster, and you're sailing in more breeze. When you're doing 3.5 times wind speed, if you get a knot gust and you get that jump in speed, and a sailing boat, unlike other boats, it actually goes faster. It uses its speed to generate more wind for itself. So the faster it goes, the more power it generates for itself. But it eventually comes up to this limit where I've got no more stability, so I can generate more power, but I start heeling over, and that's it. And what you're seeing is these boats are sailed incredibly flat and incredibly level. The only way you can really do that and generate more power is to lower the center of effort. So if the boats are heeling over too much, then you have to move that center of effort further down the rig. These guys are trying to do it as efficiently as they can. So you're at your riding moment limit. You're trying to get as much thrust as you can, and you're trying to use as much of the sail as you can. So getting that shape down the bottom and controlling it that is critical to making these boats go faster. Obviously getting rid of drag in your foils. You don't want your foils fighting each other inefficiently. You want them all constructively working together as effectively as possible. But it's assuming they're all in the same ballpark there, then controlling that rig and getting the most drive out of it down as low as possible is your next big card. And I mean, some of those sails, the shapes they've got and how they're making them work it's fascinating to watch. But there is a lot going on in there, that's for sure. It's everything here is just energy management. They've got all these energies, and you're just trying to always move. There's always a trade-off. If you're creating more lift there's a bit of drag there, or there's a bit of loss of riding moment there, and it's got to be corrected there. Going through those simulators and working out those scenarios and how they work, and then going out and seeing if it translates on the water, it's fascinating to watch. But it's once again, I'm going to use that term again. It's multifaceted. There's a lot going on inside these boats. So much it almost makes it hard to comment from the outside, because it's a pretty intricate little beast.
In the early round of the Prada Cup, Ineos was unbeaten. They beat the Italians. They beat the Americans. Yeah. Then we get into the Prada Cup final, and they couldn't buy a win until it was all done.
Yeah, it was a funny one.
What's your take? My take, the conditions didn't play well, in my opinion, and also there was a bit of operator error. But what do you reckon?
Look, it's not their first Cup event now. They kind of turned up in Bermuda like this as well, with a big budget, and then underperforming, quite from the start. Once again, did quite well in a few of the races on the way through, but handed an early entry. So to see them come in this time, there were certainly rumours around the Solent that the boat, everything wasn't that good, and the boat wasn't that fast. So to go out and see them get spanked like that, I guess it was disappointing. It's a team of that caliber really doesn't have any excuses there, and to say, oh, good fighting spirit, chin ups, and let's keep going. It's like, come on, guys. It's you're at the top of your game now, and excuses for being critical, but we're buying into what you're selling us here, and we want to see it go well. And just to say, stiff upper lip and it really hurts to lose. It's like, okay, but tell us. I really want to hear from them why they. I would like them to really come out and open up exactly what went wrong there, because it was they were on their back foot by a long shot. They've supposedly got all the greatest sailors and all the smartest minds, and basically an unlimited budget to go at this thing. So as a spectator, I really like to know what went wrong there. But as they to turn up like that, I was put my hand up and said, they're toast. This is going to be they're going to get murdered here. So to see them then come out and sail so well was like, I had to sit back and eat my words there for a bit and sit there, and I'll be happy to do that. It was like, hang on, that's impressive. And then I started to think, well, like I was saying earlier, we were only doing 50 knots for a long time. No, not one photographer, anyone come down to film our record attempt in a few tweaks, and you unlock the 65-knot boat. We saw with Oracle in San Francisco, that they were getting spanked by that, but they actually had a good package that just needed a bit of tweaking, and off they went. And then you saw Ineos lift their game, and you said, hang on, maybe spoke a bit too soon there. They went out there. I've no doubt they did have certain aspects of their package that were right. The trouble was the other teams were obviously at a slightly higher level, as we saw in the first one, and they were developing their boats as well. Obviously, the Americans got set back hugely. Prada not so much. I don't know. But even still watching Ineos in some of those last races, in some of the races they were obviously losing a lot more speed in the manoeuvres, but then So you start saying, okay, that's how they are. But then in the next race, you'd see them make improvements and you'd see them pick up, and all of a sudden they're holding them on those turns. And then they went out and, got a scalp in one of those races and looked quite slick. I wanted to see them do well. But I think in the end, what happened in the end fits with what happened at the start. I hate to say it. It was we like to see those stories come through with the underdog, but I think the other teams were just polished enough to keep them out. But
the match will be Luna Rossa and Team New Zealand, and I just want to focus in on the foils. As we know, the foil arms are supplied, so it's down to these foil tips. And let's just say, I'll start you off by saying Luna Rossa and Team Ineos, the foils they were using, no massive difference. Would you agree with that? Then
they seem to be fairly. I'm sure there's subtle differences in there, but it's the actual area and plan form is fairly similar.
Yeah. And then we haven't got many pictures of Team New Zealand's foil. We've been hearing rumours that these foils are a third of the size and weight. And this boat's already been clocked at 60 knots.
Well, I'll be surprised if they're hitting 60, because there's certain issues that come up a bit lower down the speed range there. But even the fact they've gone for those smaller foils, and you were talking about the relationship between the foils and the rigs before. You've also seen that they've got that batwing sail, so they've cut area out the top and they're moving it down the bottom. So if they've gone for a package that's less drag in the foil package, but maybe then it's going to create a lot more apparent breeze all the time. So in order to really utilise that, they need to get the centre of effort down a bit lower. So maybe those two developments are going hand in hand for a very high speed package. How they use that, what modes they've got, will be fascinating to see. Maybe they've got modes where they're footing off slightly and just going for speed, and they're hitting these speeds upwind that are just unmatchable unless you've got the same package. So they won't have to mix it up too much in the start, and even if they're getting rolled over, they can maybe have enough to find a lane where they can duck through and get through. So obviously something's going on there. They are vastly different. These guys have a lot of experience in their foiling boats from their A classes and their Moss and their things. And you think it shouldn't mean that much at this level because they're all quite experienced. They've all been through the 50-foot foiling cats and the 72s and all those things. But it just breeds a culture where you're very good at innovating well and asking the computer, very open to asking the computer slightly different questions, because you remember in that race and in that series where we did that, and you've seen that innovation happen over there. So that culture in their room of rapidly prototyping certain things and all buying into it might be one of the strengths on their boat, because certainly, you don't see like Hutchinson and Spithill and Barker and all those guys out sailing at the levels that you see, Burling and Ashby and all that going out and cleaning up world champions up. Paul Goodison's obviously very good. But, so maybe that culture has led to this thing where they're trying a few options they just know will work. So I'm pretty sure if it's on the boat, it'll be good. I think by the time it comes race day, I don't think they're having a stab at it. I think it'll be a pretty polished package.
I can see you're almost saying that through your teeth as an Australian. Let's finish on the cup by saying Australia won it before New Zealand did. How about
that? Well, look, Glenn Ashby's also another Victorian guy from the bush sort of thing, and so I'm a big fan of everything he's done in sailing, and so he's slowly getting pushed to the sideline by, everyone wants the Kiwis and all that to do it, but I think he's had a huge impact on that team. So, massive fan of what he's done with his sailing career.